Hello, everybody. This is Bob Lorem, VP of Marketing with Exact Data Discovery. Just wanted to welcome to today's webinar titled Measure Twice, Discover Once, Clichés, Chaos, and eDiscovery Project Planning. Again, always thank you for joining. This is the second year of our webinar broadcast educational content. As you know, for some of you that have been on multiple webinars, we had our first year anniversary last month with a social media webinar, which we had 566 people join us for that event. So it was a great way to start off or start the new year and end the last year. So again, this is our 13th episode of the educational series, and I think you're going to enjoy this topic. It's very specific to different people within law firms and corporations more so. So we've got about 250, 260 or so people that are registered and signed up for today's show. And for those that can't make it, of course, we'll have the recorded webinar tomorrow for them. As always, feel free to submit your questions in the chat box for the GoToWebinar system. And what we'll do is we'll hold off on answering any questions until the webinar is over. Our two speakers we'll try to address those questions best they can at the end of the show. And if for some reason we're running a little bit late, we can always contact you via email or phone as well. So as always, remember that the slides, the recording for the webinar, and a survey will be coming tomorrow with an email directly from XDD. So stay tuned from that. One more email from Exact Data Discovery to give you the information so you can access the recorded slides. Okay? With that, I'll introduce today's speakers. We got two of them. And as last time we had a webinar, I introduced Matthew Verga, who's my colleague at XDD and in previous lives together. He's going to be leading a lot of the different webinars we have on multiple topics over the next months and years to come. So I wanted to welcome Matthew again, who is our educational director, as well as content marketing director for Exact Data Discovery. As you can see from the long list of accolades here, Matthew's a 10-year industry veteran coming from both sides of the fence as an attorney, as well as a practicing eDiscovery specialist in multiple areas. And basically, he's worked across every phase of the EDRM from start to finish. So he's well versed on this particular topic to lead the show today, as well as many others to come. He'll be joined by my old friend and colleague as well, Bill Anderson down in Texas, who is our Regional Vice President of eDiscovery Services. Bill manages about, 300 people or so, I think, last time I counted. He's very involved on a lot of different projects, runs the project management teams at Exact Data Discovery, and has both law firm and client side experience. So I guess you could say experiences as well, Bill. But Bill presently manages about 25 XDD project managers now who take care of our clients' projects. So with that, I'd like to turn over the cue to Matthew, who will take the show from here. And again, I'll pop in with any time updates, Matthew and Bill, and then I'll jump in toward the end with questions as they come in at the end.
Thank you very much, Bob, for the introduction. I certainly appreciate it. As Bob said, our topic today is Measure Twice, Discover Once, Clichés, Chaos, and eDiscovery Project Planning. And our goal in this program is to provide folks with kind of an overview, really step-by-step of how to think through all the parts of scoping and planning a new eDiscovery project to get it off to a strong start that is connected to the reality that you're dealing with. And so to do that today, we're going to talk a little bit about clichés, chaos, and expectations. We're going to talk about initial project scoping, about different ways you can go about investigating your assumptions, including interviews, data mapping, surveying, and sampling. And then we will be talking about volume estimation and cost estimation, and then about key roles that need to be defined and important communication guidelines. And then finally, we will review key takeaways and go through all of your questions for further discussion. And then finally, we'll end with a brief preview of next month's program and next month's speaker. And as Bob said, I have joining me today Bill Anderson, who I'm very happy to have on the line. Bill has extensive hands-on experience with all of this, and since he oversees all of our PMs, he sees every permutation of these issues that comes up. So he's just going to jump in throughout and add his own insights and perspectives and anecdotes and give you some more perspective on the questions at the end as well. And we're happy to have him join us, so thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Matt. I'm happy to be here.
All right, so let's get started with this exceptionally long title that I insisted we put on this program for no apparent reason. Clichés, Chaos, and Expectations. There are a lot of aphorisms in English about the fact that planning is really important. Measure twice, cut once, a stitch in time saves nine, or most famously, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I like this one in particular because it comes from a charming little passage that Benjamin Franklin wrote in an anonymous editorial in the February 4th, 1735 edition of the Pennsylvania Gazette. And the phrase comes from this passage of his, which reads, "In the first place, as an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, I would advise them to take care how they suffer living coals in a full shovel to be carried out of one room into another, or up or downstairs, unless in a warming pan shut. For scraps of fire may fall into chinks and make no appearance until midnight, when your stairs being in flames, you may be forced, as I once was, to leap out of your windows and hazard your necks to avoid being oven roasted." I think every word of that applies with no change to the eDiscovery process and is very much what this is like. The most expensive mistakes to make are the ones made right at the very beginning, when potential sources get overlooked, when potential custodians get excluded, when kinds of material aren't accounted for in the overall plan, and you proceed forward with gaps in your vision that then come back at the 11th hour to burn your whole situation and end up with sanctions or really expensive remedial measures you have to undertake to rush through correcting things later. So I really think this is a good encapsulation of the challenge we all face to try and launch these projects effectively. And certainly the world is continuing to make that harder and harder for us, because eDiscovery is subject to constantly multiplying and diversifying source types and volumes, changing practices, new tools and services. And so there's really a great recipe here for chaos and uncertainty that leads to small but important things getting missed to come back later. Because of how important this has all become, state bars and other industry organizations are starting to formally recognize how important effective eDiscovery planning is. There was a lot of coverage last year and the year before about California issuing a formal ethics opinion on required standards for attorney technical competence. But several of the items that they listed are essentially eDiscovery project planning steps. They explicitly require that you be able to do an initial overall assessment of eDiscovery issues, including analyzing the client systems and storage, advising them on effective collection and preservation options, being able to identify all the relevant custodians successfully, and then being able to adequately plan how to do all that so that you can have an effective meet and confer negotiation about it. All of that is basically good project planning that is now required as a matter of law in California, and I'm sure will be everywhere else as other states continue to emulate them. It's also come up in the EDRM project management framework, which places a heavy emphasis on the scoping phase as being the most important part. The scoping phase, quote, lays the foundation for project success by aligning all teams to a common vision and goals. And then that is immediately followed by 3 subsequent planning phases, all based on the scoping phase. It's the heart of the whole project management system that they offer. So how are we going to help you all do this and do this effectively? Well, one of the most valuable things you can do is checklists. And I say no really here because I know it sounds silly and obvious to some people, but checklists are enormously effective at changing organizational behavior and at getting people to behave in consistent and comprehensive ways in recurrent situations. The more often something happens, the more useful it can be to put it in a checklist so that it gets standardized. And one great example of this, this has come up in medical settings for years now. And you can find numerous studies from numerous different areas. Here's one example from an initiative called the Keystone Initiative in Michigan State, which was just Michigan State hospitals agreeing to use step-by-step checklists for a handful of core activities, like putting in a central line and a few other common things that they did. And by doing this, just having nurses and doctors just check off on a list that they did all the things and thought about all the steps, they, in the first 3 months, cut the ICU infection rate by 2/3, and in the first 18 months saved over 1,500 lives and $175 million by agreeing to look at a checklist. So it's worth it for your organization, particularly if your organization is a serial litigant of any kind or recipient of serial litigation, to establish some standard practices and put in place some reference checklists you can use to make sure you think about all the steps as you go, and don't miss things from project to project. And so as we go through this program, we're going to give you some sample checklists for each of these little sub-activities that you can take and use and modify for your organization as starting points. And as Bob said at the top, all of this material will be coming to you after the program. So you will get a PDF of this deck, including the checklists that are on the slides. And you can also find the checklists on our website on the blog if you want to go and get them even before the slides arrive. So, initial project scoping. The very first thing that needs to happen when you undertake a new project is trying to engage in an imaginative exercise. Unless you are in an organization that is sort of very mature in its processes and that already has extensive historical aggregated data about your matters and about how they go and what's involved in them, you're not going to be able to just look at a new matter that comes in and know what resources will be implicated and what things will need to be collected and preserved and who will need to be spoken to. From the start, all you'll really know is the general subject matter, maybe what the essential events are giving rise to the issue, and if there were any specifically named defendants or key witnesses in the document, you would know them. But beyond that, really anything or everything in the company might be relevant. So you need to engage in a brainstorming exercise with other knowledgeable individuals to try and figure out what there might be that you need to go looking for. And I really encourage this sort of brainstorming exercise before you start running around and looking for actual things, because finding things is a great way to provide confirmation bias that you already thought of it all and cause you not to go look under the other rocks you should have looked under. So starting with, from a clean slate, let's all get together, in-house counsel, outside counsel, anybody else with, key knowledge of the overall situation, and discuss what do we think exists. And what you're doing here is you are trying to figure out what types of things might exist based on an imagination of what happened in context. The events. Yeah, please jump in.
Actually, the first 2 points there are really when you actually kind of win how you're going to scope your project. Knowing who does what, when, and how, discussing it with your counsel, being able to identify users and how they actually handle data, especially communication, because what people typically miss in this step is that people have some kind of administrative access that maybe they're unaware of. So right here is that great moment to go, do people have the ability to save PSTs locally, or do they use IM chats and things of that nature? And right here, funny enough, as early as it seems, you have the opportunity to start finding those locations of mysterious data that you've never heard of that can sneak up on you and get you later on in the case.
Absolutely, that's a great point, and that's another great example of a kind of thing that might be there. What do people have access to? What systems can they store things on? And depending on the subject of the case and the areas of the company involved, you might need to think about whether there are materials in your ERP systems, in your enterprise resource systems, or whether HR has files that are important. Or if there's an internal chat system where the employees involved in whatever the matter is talking to each other about it on a log chat system. Do you need to go pull voicemails or check backup tapes for things? There's lots of little rocks that things might be under, and sitting down and trying to think through them and ask questions like Bill just described to look for the less common sources up front will save you a lot of headaches later. And as much detail as we're all going to describe this, and we're talking about activities that are only going to take you a few days, a day, a few days to execute. But doing them well makes a difference. And so at this point, one thing that's also helpful is taking one of the sort of custodian interview questionnaires that your collection people probably have, whatever your preferred collection people are, probably have little checklists they go through with custodians when they're collecting to ask them about all the things that they have and the things that they use. And you can sit down with a generic one of those as a way to help you think, do we have any of this? Does anybody in the company use cloud backup? Does anybody in the company do this? Is this something we need to worry about? And have your own sort of top level discussion about it before you go out and start getting into the weeds. All right, so once you have your list of expected sources, you've all gotten together and you have a reasonable idea of what you think is probably there, what you want to see, what you expect, the other side is going to want to see and where you think it's likely to be inside the company, you then need to probably prioritize that. If it's a small, simple case, it may just be a short list and you may be done. But in most of the kinds of cases we get involved in that are a little bit bigger and a little bit hairier, you're going to want to prioritize to determine how you allocate your resources and how you treat each category of potential sources. And so like your top tier stuff are the things that absolutely must be looked for and sought out, the key custodians who need to be preserved. Your tier 2 stuff is stuff that like probably is related, but maybe you don't have to get. You need to make sure it's preserved, absolutely. Maybe you need to collect some of it right away. Maybe some of it can wait till you learn more and do some negotiation. And then tier 3 are sort of the most distantly connected things, your tertiary custodians, your people who only maybe have some unique stuff, maybe just have duplicative stuff that won't be that helpful. And sort of ranking that out will help you prioritize and guide all the subsequent steps that you're going to need to take, as well as to aid you in your negotiation during the meet and confer. So a quick checklist for your initial scoping thought processes and planning. You want to make sure you ask yourselves, what are the events at issue and what are the legal claims? What internal and external individuals should be involved in brainstorming about the materials we're going to need? What questions do we have about the events? And what questions will the other side have about the events? What materials might there be that would answer any of the relevant legal claims and defenses? What individuals, devices, departments, or systems might contain those materials? What distinctive characteristics of those materials might help you search for or filter or find them? Are there keywords? Are there dates? Are there names that would help you weed out the good stuff from the bad? What are the relative priority of each potential source you've identified? And what grouping into tiers should you then apply to that prioritized list? And so if you go through those steps in your mind when you're planning out a new project, even if many of them don't take you very long, that will help you get off to a strong start in the initial phase. And the next thing is, after you get through that first meeting or first day or two of internal communication, figuring out kind of what you're going to go looking for, is to actually go investigate those assumptions about what exists and find out what's there and find out more details about how you're actually going to get it and how important it's going to be and what challenges you're going to face. We're going to talk briefly about 4 different investigative options: targeted interviewing, data mapping, surveying, and sampling. Which of these is most useful will really depend on the specifics of your circumstances. In particular, what it is you're facing. If you've got a really big project, you'll need to do a few different things to get a handle on the whole situation. If your problem is lots of systems and sources, departmental and enterprise things, then a data map will be very, very helpful to you. If your thing is lots of custodians, particularly distributed custodians, then surveys and sampling will be much more helpful to you in terms of managing that and getting a picture of it. By targeted interviews, these are the sort of the easiest and most common option because you can just do them very quickly and without a lot of expense. And what these are is like doing a traditional full custodian interview, but not for every potential custodian. This is you going and having sort of less formal interviews with a few of the key custodians, the people at the heart of the matter, who maybe are not employees you want to involve in the project planning process, but are people who will know a lot about what materials they have and who else has materials and can kind of confirm for you or deny for you your assumptions about, oh yeah, we discuss that project all the time on the company Slack, so you need to go get all of our notes from there. Or no, we exclusively worked in the share folder, and so it's all in there. And so that's where you can start finding some of that out, as Bill and I were saying earlier, is by going and talking to some of these folks.
And these people actually have information they can garner for you as far as who talks to who and how often.
Right.
Does someone's subordinate actually answer all their emails for them, or do they check their box regularly, or those sorts of things? And it allows you to really get an idea of who talks to whom and when, and that kind of folds toward the data mapping as you move forward in these steps. Absolutely,
helps you fill in that network to know who else to put in there. And then, yeah, as Bill just said, yeah, into the data mapping then. And this is a concept you may be familiar with already, and we're not going to go deep into how to do data mapping. That could be its own program. But essentially what this is it is about tracking the materials on the hardware systems rather than the individual people who have materials. And it's building out for yourself a spreadsheet or a matrix that logs all of the relevant departmental systems, enterprise systems, laptops, devices, things that are going to be part of your potential collection scope, and then documenting about them. What kind of thing is it? Who manages it? You know, what year is it? What type version is it? You know, does it have built-in export tools or not that we can use? Are we going to need external collection resources for this thing, etc.? And by documenting all of that material together, which is a project you'd undertake probably with internal IT, you will give yourself a really good map that will help you plan out the collection aspect with specificity when we get to the volume and cost estimation activities. Gives you something you can really plan for, and also helps identify some of the potential downstream issues, because these are some of the sources that can provide output that is different than the standard mix of files you find on a laptop. These things might be denser or more complicated to handle later, the things coming off the enterprise system. So the more you can know about that up front, the better. Oh, please go ahead.
Yeah, one of the biggest things we see here is actually archival systems. Their specific purpose is meant to secure your data and compress your data so that you don't have to take as much storage space. But when you go to export the data, it's a little bit different. So most of our IT professionals, their job is to secure us and keep us from getting in trouble, and certainly make sure that we keep the cost down on our actual storage. But then we have to get it out. Are we actually exporting data that's usable? What happens when we use these export tools? Are we trying to use a tool that maybe doesn't have that purpose and isn't meant to do that type of export? So these are a great spot to actually figure out what's going on in your data, and maybe even take a quick sample of what you've got and what the export would look like if you were to do it at that time.
Absolutely. And as Bill and his teams will undoubtedly also tell you, in a perfect world, you would at some point for your organization undertake a proactive data mapping exercise when you're not racing for a specific piece of litigation, to create sort of a standing map of your systems that can just be updated periodically. And any project where you have to do one in a reactive form, you can, after that project, take that as a starting point and go finish it, expand it out to the rest of the company, and then you've got one for the next time, which will undoubtedly make your life easier. All right, surveying and sampling are next to investigative activity options. By surveying, we literally mean issuing a survey to your potential custodians. This is particularly good when you've got a lot of custodians. I've dealt with cases with dozens or hundreds of custodians distributed all over the country, or occasionally globally. And in those kinds of scales and distributions, targeted interviews aren't enough. If you just interview a few people, you're not going to get a sufficient picture of what the total potential scope is, because there's too many people and too much diversity. But if you go try to interview everybody, you will spend a fortune and a lot of time flying you and your co-attorneys all over the country to talk to everybody. Instead, this is an excellent interim step. And it can be done very basically. You know, you can use paper forms if you want. By far the most common option, I think at this time, is digital forms, usually most often PDF, sometimes Excel spreadsheets that have forms built in them. You can also use third-party online survey tools, though some people rightly have concerns about how secure those platforms are for this kind of information. And then there are some service providers that have like custom-built secure web survey portals that they use for this kind of work, and they can give you a template and customize it for you, and then help you throw one of these online relatively quickly for your staff. But the goal is to have people self-report to you information about what they do and how they do it and what materials they have and where they store them and all of that kind of stuff you would want to ask them if you were doing a targeted interview or trying to map the systems that they use. And you just have them fill it all out in a pre-format standardized way like this that you can then aggregate all together so that you can import all of those answers into a big spreadsheet or a database, and then, you know, filter and sort and search and go, okay, here's all the people who said that they use their cell phones for work email. So we'll put these guys on one list. We're going to have to deal with them for mobile device collection. And then these are all the people that said they don't have anything relevant to this. So we'll do some follow-up spot checks, but we can move these people off to the side. And it lets you get your hands around a big pile of human resources information kind of all at once to figure out which humans you need to go talk to more and do things with. And then judgmental sampling, formal statistical sampling. Try before you buy. Judges have been yelling at people about doing this for quite some time in a variety of contexts, including in this specific context. There was a very widely reported case about 5 years ago that I've given here as an example. Pippins versus KPMG was a wage and hour type case that involved potentially materials from many similarly situated employees of KPMG, all being relevant to the undertaking. And the need to potentially preserve or collect or handle the laptop contents and emails of hundreds of employees was prohibitively expensive and challenging. And the parties fought extensively over how relevant the stuff would be and whether it was worth, spending all this money and whether there was a compromise. And the court's answer repeatedly was, why don't you just go collect a few of them and tell us whether there's anything useful there or not? Why are you fighting and wasting the court's time on hypotheticals? Just go pull some and tell me. And that's always good advice. Judgmental sampling is any sort of informal sampling where you are just taking some informal samples of a large set of things to get an anecdotal sense of what's there. When we say statistical sampling or formal sampling, we mean doing a structured sampling process that gives you one of those outputs that is an actual strength measurement. We believe there's this percentage of relevance with a confidence level of 95% plus or minus a margin of error of 2%. That's formal sampling. And in some cases, you might even do both. For a really big case, you might go pick a couple of representative employees from different departments and collect their materials to get a sense of whether those groups of employees have relevant stuff or not. And if it's particularly important or the volume of what you get is large, you might go ahead and load it up in a review platform and take a formal statistical sample of what you've collected to give some, say, okay, so we pulled 6 of these employees, and these employees, less than 2% of their materials are in any way related to the action. Here's the numbers, here's the review. And that puts you in a much stronger position to negotiate during a meet and confer or to explain yourself to a judge. And this is more important than ever these days because of the increased emphasis on proportionality. More parties care more. The rules have been revised, not to really change the standard, but to emphasize the importance of proportionality in all of the discovery decisions, and courts are acting accordingly. There have been a number of cases already this year where judges have leaned on the revised rules to emphasize, that requested discovery has to remain proportional. So going and saying, okay, we did 6 sample custodians, it costs this much to do them, we found this little material, is this proportional? We don't think so. That puts you in a really good position if that's a kind of an argument you end up having to make.
And additionally, that's your opportunity to look at the date ranges of the relevant material, any of official search terms or any words that come up back and forth. You have so much power at this point by taking one key custodian and being able to analyze the data either statistically or just judgmentally, to be able to go back and negotiate what you're doing. If you need 2 months of time instead of 10 months of time, the cost savings are in the thousands or even hundreds of thousands to be able to pull smaller sets of data. Also, thinking about the fact that you have a key custodian, if their relevance level is relatively low, you would imagine that the people that they're talking to or working with on a project or some other deal that's going on, their numbers would reduce as well. So as you go down the line, duplication rises, the relevance percentage goes down, and you actually have less and less data to deal with further down the road. And this one step gives you all of that information.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, it will empower you to assess all of those things in a really good way. We have some quick checklists here, 5-line checklists for each of these 4 activities. I will spare you reading all of these. I don't think you probably want me to do that. You all can read these yourselves and you will receive them in the material tomorrow. But yeah, it's a straightforward sort of a thing, but it's worth thinking through it rationally, making sure you've got the right people involved, and then executing the ones that are really going to help you. Spending a day or two or three doing a few of these things up front can save you a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth months down the road. So let's move on to volume and cost estimation, which I know are topics near and dear to Bill's heart. At this point in the process, if you have engaged in the brainstorming exercise and you've gone out and done the investigation to validate your assumptions and you've gathered information as you've done so about what's there, as we've discussed, you're now equipped to start doing some rough volume and cost estimation for yourself to figure out what size problem you're dealing with. At this point, you should know with some reasonable accuracy how many custodians you're probably looking at, how many devices each custodian probably has, whether the custodians or others have mailboxes or network shares that are also going to require collection, what enterprise and departmental systems, if any, are going to be implicated, whether you're going to need to hit backup tapes or other archival systems, and whether you're going to need to do sort of broad collection or whether you have some good grounds on which to do a more targeted sort of a collection. And with all of that information, you can sort of start putting together basic math about what your likely total collected volume is. And that's just, as you see there, basic, what you found out about sizes times what you found out about counts added up by category. And that's hypothetically what your collection guys are going to come back with after they go and round up all the stuff. But that is only the beginning of the analysis because there are several other things you have to think about to adjust those numbers beyond what gets collected. The first of these is the initial expansion. And I'm going to let Bill speak a bit to this, but things can change pretty dramatically depending on what it is you've got in your gigabyte of stuff.
Absolutely. Everyone knows that email PSTs expand, and a lot of people use the kind of initial assessment of 1.5 times the normal size of the PST. Going back to the earlier point, your system may compress those even more depending on how you use it. Or it may be pulling things out that you don't even see. So I have seen the maximum situation I've seen for PST expansion was actually 10 times. So imagine going into a case, scoping it for 50 or 100 gig and coming out with 10 times that amount of data. Your numbers were off. That was specific area of law and certainly more directed towards a financial institution. The particular person involved was a high-level person getting a lot of reporting and a lot of large attachment files. So something to think about. This is where those areas where you want to come up with a number, and you're doing a really great job of coming up with a number, but it will always, always, always be a range because you have to know that it could get bigger, it could get smaller. We've got denisting and deduplication that we have to worry about. A laptop getting in someone's entire hard drive, once you pull off everything that's junk, the system files and all of that stuff, either through DNIST or going to a user-generated file type situation, you're going to have a lot less data. So those are the good things. You love having less data when it comes to the hard drives and the computers, but email, documents on servers, shares and things of that nature, zip files, when you start going through and finding that, is when you start really thinking about what you're going to get. And funny enough, the simplest way of looking at this is if you have a piece of data, getting a file extension listing gives you so much information about what your expansion rate is going to be, how much email versus loose files you have. And then, if we want to talk about going viral, which we have some webinars on, you also have to start thinking about Twitter and all of these other accounts, and maybe that data is important as well. We've actually had a situation where a user had 1.2 million tweets. We were not expecting that when we created this account.
Yeah, that's I hadn't even thought about how large that could get, but yeah, that's another whole mess. And yeah, it's like Bill says, it's all gonna get quite a bit larger. And getting a file count list is a great idea. That really, you can at a very least, you can sort of stratify your estimate and apply some different expansion guesses to different portions of your collection, and that'll help you get a more realistic range on your picture. And as he also touched on, it will then get smaller again. You will have some objective reduction from denisting, from removing all the system files, from global deduplication is still the standard, and then often some objective filtering, to the relevant date range or to relevant file formats, et cetera. I would note about that, though, the trend I've seen in recent years, and I'm curious if you've seen the same thing, Bill, is that as parties have become more sophisticated about how they conduct collection, they're doing more and more of that targeting on the collection side, which means less reduction in volume during processing. If it's already been filtered when you got it, there's not as much to filter out when you process it.
Absolutely. The software and the ability of these collection folks on the forensic side have gotten so good that they're able to do a lot of this up front. The only caution I would ever have about that is in the idea of measuring twice and cutting once. Maybe you measure twice and you cut once, but cut a little bit bigger than you think you should, because you can always cut it down further, but you can't make it longer. So, when you start filtering by date at the time of collection, make sure you know your time range. Make sure you know that you're not going to need to go back and pull more data, because if you only have 6 months and then 5 months later in the middle of the litigation, your other side wins an argument and they say they need 4 more months, you're really going back to the beginning at this point. So maybe if you have a 6 month window, maybe get 2 months on either side. We can filter it down a little bit more when it comes to the processing time. You're not out that much at that point, but what you are definitely not out is the high cost of going back and recollecting.
Absolutely. And then on the size changes, the one other thing I'll note is that it's also very common, and not everybody realizes this, that after you've done expansion and then after you've done, sort of your objective filtering stuff, when you then load it into the review platform, it will expand again a little bit more. The amount depends on which review platform you're using, but your data will then be accompanied by a database file containing all of the extracted metadata and all of the tracked coding decisions, as well as separate extracted text files or potentially TIFF images or other pieces of the overall project database. And so all of that together will equal your collected, processed, filtered volume plus that other stuff. And so you want to avoid any sticker shock when you see what the hosted volume is for hosting calculations, because you will need that extra space for the project. All right, so for figuring this stuff out, there are really quite a lot of calculators available. The good place to go start is the eDRM website. The eDRM website has a page where they have collected together half a dozen different calculators, one of their own creation and then 5 given to them by other folks. And these are all sort of, these are vendor agnostic calculators where you can adjust all the assumptions yourself and adjust all the variables yourself and sort of model your project different ways. And there's a few different approaches represented in the ones that they have available. Most vendors also offer a calculator of some kind, which is typically keyed to whatever their pricing model or their project structure, preferred project structure is. The other thing you'll want to calculate at this point, besides trying to calculate your data volumes, is to try to figure out about how many documents you think you might have in your volume. This is another sort of hairy estimation question that can vary wildly depending on what your gigabytes are. But there are some metrics available out there in the industry. eDRM has a collection of metrics. I've got the link to this is on the website in the blog post that goes with this. But they've got a page of metrics that they've gathered from reviewing data of how many of different kinds of files will go into a given thing and what they think are fairly typical mixes. And then a guy named John Tredenik, who's a good attorney and practitioner, does an annual sort of overview of this issue in conjunction with Catalyst, where they review a new big block of sort of litigation data from the prior year each year and publish the results. The 2016 version of it is the most recent one. I haven't seen the 2017 one come out yet. But the 2016 one, they concluded they think the average is about 3,500 docs per gigabyte. their answers over the last 5 years have fluctuated between like 3,000 and 5,000. So there's not been a huge amount of variation year to year in what they've found. But I do think it's important to remember when you're talking about averages, the inherent flaw of averages. I don't know if anybody's read that book, great book, but flaw of averages. The average is almost never the reality, it's the average. And as an average of, say, a couple of million, litigation documents from across many cases, what it's showing you is what would be in a hypothetical, perfectly mixed gigabyte that is proportionally made up of all the things that show up in litigation in that proportion. But there is no gigabyte that is that gigabyte. If as Bill said earlier, you have a gigabyte of PSD files, that's going to be 10,000 emails. If you have a gigabyte that's webinar video recordings, that's going to be 5 to 10 programs. So 5 to 10 on the low end to 10,000 on the high end with an average of 3,500. It's useful to know 3,500, but you need to remember how it varies with content when you're thinking about doc counts as well as volumes.
And data makeup is really experience. When you've seen it, you have it. And what you see, common areas, different different industries and things of that nature. You can see one thing in an engineering outlook, for example, more construction type cases, you see a lot fewer gigs, docs per gig, because there's a lot of drawings and higher resolution documents versus financial industries, medical, and things of that nature, where there's a lot more information stored. Heavy email versus heavy document. It just depends on what you're looking at, and really it comes down to the have you seen this before? Have you worked with this client before? That type of information, which you gather early on. So it works out well once you get to this point.
That's a great point that it also does. Yeah, it varies with industry and company type as well. Absolutely. So the last step after you've done sort of your volume and your document count estimations is you can now take those numbers and you can do cost estimations. In this context, again, most of this is fairly straightforward math. If you've been thorough in your research and you've been reasonable in your estimation ranges, you can just multiply those by the prices from whatever your preferred solution is, whether that's a bundle you have somewhere or a volumetric price list or something else, and you will know what you are likely to spend on your project. The source and type counts are the most important for estimating collection costs accurately. The projected collected volume helps you estimate processing costs most accurately. The post-processing volume projection helps you figure out your monthly hosting, and your projected file and document counts help you estimate review cost. I will make a note about review cost, that review cost is the part of this that is quite a bit more complicated to estimate than the rest of it. And I could do, and probably will do later this year, a whole program on review project design. But just to give you some idea of the ways you need to modify it, a review is not quite as simple as just taking your expected document count and dividing it by 50 to get a number of man hours, because you will undoubtedly have other things that will affect the actual review rate and the total number of review hours required, including how much further, if at all, you reduce the document count during ECA. If you're going to go in and do filtering and searching and clustering and try to narrow down the scope further, that will reduce the count further. Additionally, if you plan to use near duplicate identification or email threading, that will both reduce the count further and it will speed up the per batch review speed. Same thing goes if you're going to do traditional versus technology assisted review. Traditional review, takes more first level hours, but technology assisted review takes more QC and management hours. It's often still a savings, but you have to allocate different things at different prices differently depending on your approach. Same thing goes for how much training, oversight, and QC you think you're going to need. The bigger a project is, those items will increase on a J curve. It's not a one-to-one that you can just every 10 reviewers is one more hour of X, because the more people you have, the more time you actually have to spend going person to person and keeping consistency happening. So size does lead to higher management costs. And then, privilege. You got to factor in doing privilege logging and privilege tracking. And even if you haven't seen a lot of it in what you've looked at the beginning, you should always assume at least 5 to 10% of whatever you get at a minimum is going to be privileged and require that. And then as Bill was talking about specialty documents, you've got a lot of CAD drawings or multimedia files or spreadsheets or databases, or really anything other than text documents. If you've got a lot of those, that can also affect your review costs. If you have a lot of them, you may need to create a specialized workflow to handle them separately, or if there's not a lot of them, but there's some of them, you just need to factor in that those will slow people down during review. All of this stuff are things that an experienced project manager can help you think through when you're trying to plan out and budget for a review project. But I just wanted to make sure folks had those items in mind and knew it was more than just dividing by 50 and multiplying hours times a rate.
Well, hopefully you know what you have by some of the steps you've already taken. So in that last point, if you have junk files or programming language files or very specific proprietary formats, QuickBooks, Peachtree, that kind of stuff when it comes to the more banking and finance industry, you can kind of push those to the side. You're not going to really be able to review them anyway. A lot of that stuff's left for experts. So you have the opportunity, again, to kind of keep that stuff away and allow someone that can look at it, deal with it, and then really dive down to that stuff that you're going to be able to cut through pretty quickly.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. I'm always in favor of trying to separate and handle separately anything you can to make things as consistent and quick for the reviewers as possible. All right, so again, I will let you all read these checklists in the materials you receive on your own so that we can get to your questions before the end of the hour. So we'll move into our last topic, which is roles in communication. And I think this is important to talk about because eDiscovery projects, almost by definition, if they're of any size at all, are going to include a bunch of people, probably from a minimum of 3 different places, sometimes 4 or 5 different places, as I have worked with many companies that will allow sort of the law firm maybe to pick their preferred hosting company or eDiscovery services provider, but they may have a separate contract with a manned review service and a separate contract with a corporate collection service. So you might have 5 organizations in the mix. And at all of them, at a minimum, you're going to have from the client, you're going to have in-house counsel and their support staff, IT and records management personnel getting involved. The law firm will have the case team attorneys and their support staff, their litigation personnel, support personnel, as well as their internal or contracted review teams. And then the outside service providers, you'll have somebody doing collection, somebody doing processing, potentially somebody else doing review, as well as project management and support. And all of those people have to somehow be brought into coordination and to be made to move in lockstep towards the same goal, which is a legitimate challenge. And so the best way to get this off to a good start is to think about it actively at the beginning and set a few ground rules before the project really spins up to full speed. One of the most useful things to do is you should establish a clear primary point of contact for each organization that can function as the main funnel or air traffic controller for everything going into and out of that organization to the others. You want to have them copied on all the communications going to anybody on their team. And you want to have them watching all the communications on the project to make sure the right things are getting routed to the right people within their organization. Most often, at a service provider, that'll be like a project manager that's been assigned. At a law firm, that'll quite often be a junior attorney or a senior paralegal. And at a client organization, that will often be a senior paralegal or like a litigation manager or sometimes an AGC, depending on the organization. And then once you've got your primary points of contact, we also highly recommend that you predetermine some of the key decision makers for the project. There are a lot of ways that you can end up having human and technical resources sitting around waiting, spending your money, waiting for decisions to be made on what they should do next. So knowing in advance who has the authority to make on-the-fly decisions about collection issues, who has the authority to make batch coding decisions, who has the authority to change the tagging palette, who has the authority to sign off on productions, etc. Knowing in advance at least the who can be reached to make snap decisions on collection stuff should be figured out before you send any collection agents to go do on-site hourly work for you. And for sure, you should have somebody on call to make review decisions before you get a team of people in a room working hourly for you. So knowing in advance where to go to get those calls saves time and money later on.
The opposite is also true. Who don't you want talking to other people? Who don't you want on an email? And who don't you want?
Absolutely. Good note. Yeah. Which cul-de-sacs of fake authority should be avoided at all costs? Yeah, and then you also want to document escalation paths. Most organizations probably have one internally already, but the other organizations you're working with, they don't know yours. They don't know that internally, you know, if you need help, you go to this person, and if they can't do it, you go up to that guy, and then if that doesn't, you go to this lady. Like, and so obviously you don't want outsiders just calling every person directly in your organization, but you all should have an agreed plan for who's on call after hours. How do you reach the after hours person? Who do you call when there's an emergency or something big happens that like the first line contact isn't able to handle or isn't able to make a decision about? Who do you escalate to? How do you escalate it? Having all of that stuff planned out in advance so that when the inevitable issue occurs, when a server goes down or a custodian fails to turn over their laptop, or you know, the judge makes an unexpected decision and accedes to a request from the other side that changes the scope of the project at the last minute, you know, how do you go about getting the decision makers you need involved and getting things moving forward? Those are all things that can be mapped out with a quick couple of conversations up front and will save you a lot of headaches as you proceed through your project. And then finally, I think that you also want to put in place some email communication rules and some documentation guidelines for your team. And by email communication rules, I mean a couple of things. First, message and document identifiers. Is there a standardized indicator like a matter code or a matter name that you want to have included on all communications for the project, both so that people know immediately which project it's for, and so that later on, all the messages related to it can be very quickly found. They can be searched and sorted and pulled out of systems because they all bear a standard indicator that they're for this project. It's a very helpful thing later in a matter. Additionally, you want everybody on the same page about what the required privilege or confidentiality or internal screen language is. Whatever the warnings are that are applicable to the situation, everybody needs to be distributed the standard language that they can set into their signatures and their footers and their whatever, so that everything is properly protected and denoted for that status. And then finally, you want to give them storage and retention guidelines, because everything that you're generating is now a relevant document to the matter. It's all either privilege protected or work product protected, but it is all relevant and you can't just be deleting it. So you need to make sure people understand what the retention rules are, and if there's a certain way you want them to folder all the emails or a place you want them to put all the materials that need to be preserved, let them know all of that as well. And then for the documentation guidelines, you need the same instructions for anything physical that you have for the email. People need to know about labels, they need to know about storage, etc. But they also need to know about any type of like recurring documentation that needs to be generated as the project proceeds. Are there weekly status reports? Is there monthly progress against budget reports? Do we want email confirmation sent to document any instructional change? Are we doing a change log system? Whatever we're doing to document the decisions as we go, everybody should be on board with and know how that's being done, so that all of that can be done consistently throughout the project. And then, as Bill alluded to earlier, you can also have situations where you have an internal firewall set up between different teams that can't work on the same thing. You know, folks who work for people in different parts of the same industry and need to stay, you know, clear away from each other on their matters. The vendor or the law firm may have an internal screen that says certain people absolutely cannot see any of these materials, and you may need to apply standard warnings or email communication rules associated with those sorts of internal firewalls as well. All right, so there's a roles and communications checklist that I will spare you my recitation of. And we will move on to just go over the key takeaways real quick, and then we'll let Bob come back in the line and feed us any of the questions that you've been putting into the system while we yammered on. So from my perspective, the key takeaways are pretty basic here, and it's that taking the time to do effective eDiscovery planning will reduce your risk and reduce your cost. You're less likely to miss things and less likely to go down unnecessary dead ends if you spend a little time up front, getting it all together. And having some checklists on hand to make sure that every time you start a project, you think through all the same questions will really help you do a good job. You want to, when you're thinking about what exists, you want to remember to imagine events in context, think about how employees actually do their jobs, and then you want to prioritize by likelihood that the stuff exists, how important it is if it does exist, and how likely it is the other side's going to ask for it. You want to then investigate as thoroughly as you need to really test those assumptions. Talk to people, map your enterprise systems, survey large groups of custodians, sample materials whenever possible to find out what's really in them and replace your hypotheticals with facts. And then use all of that information you gather to estimate your volumes and your dot counts, and then use your volumes and your dot counts to estimate your costs, and take all of that information with you to do effective meet and confer negotiation about scope and proportionality and all the rest of it. And lastly, define your roles and your communication rules as early as possible to make sure everybody knows who they should be talking to and how they should be getting help and how to escalate when things go wrong. It will save you a lot of headaches as you proceed. All right, Bob, we have any questions in the queue?
Yes, first of all, guys, just really nice job. I mean, this is a topic that I think is applicable to not just this industry, but life and any other business in general. I mean, it's such a effective project planning. In fact, let me back up a step. It was 12 years ago. I wrote a line for a brochure for exact data discovery. I'm just going to repeat it right now because it's applicable. It said, in life and in business, relationships succeed or fail based upon communication, period. I think everything you guys talked about today, all the different details, disparate systems, and all the different constituents that are involved, it all comes down to having communication, whether it's written, spoken, nonverbal, implied, nonverbal, whatever it is. And I think that you guys did a very nice job of presenting all the different aspects of it and the things that need to happen, both proactively for planning and then reactively once a project started and completed. So really, really nice job. So given that, I have two questions. One, I'm going to paraphrase. This is from a gentleman named Yukon Cornelius in California. For any of you that are from the 60s like myself and understand Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, we all know who Yukon Cornelius is, but this is actually a legit question, and I know who this person is, so nice job. So I'll paraphrase. Of all the different tools and systems and things you guys talked about today and the methods and checklists, is there any particular, call it magic bullet, software or system that can help tie all this stuff together to make my life easier?
A really experienced eDiscovery professional really is your only shot.
Literally took the words out of my mouth, Bill.
It always boils down to, have you seen this before? Have you fallen into this trap before? Have you missed something and needed to go back and redo it? Have you seen something explode into exponentially larger than it was expected? And some of us have been in the trenches for a while, and we've kind of dealt with that and seen that. And a lot of the people on this phone have been on it as well. And certainly having the ability to go, hey, hold on a second, I've fallen through this little trap before, can save you a lot of time and pain and suffering. But as long as they're open and honest with what you're doing and how they discuss it with you, the main thing is you don't want to find out what litigation readiness means when you're in the middle of litigation. If you've already started that, you might have a better chance at getting past it.
And I would second that and add that the earlier the better. And I know a lot of people are reluctant to involve an eDiscovery service provider until they know more about the project, they know what their needs are. But you can request consultative help from someone during the very early phases, even without committing to hire them for all the downstream work. You can get some expert guidance when you're planning and scoping. I've been brought in a lot of times after the meet and confer has already happened, and parties have already made a negotiated agreement to do something that it turns out doesn't line up at all with what the actual data on the ground is. And we end up having to do that whole negotiation process over because they just did it all in hypotheticals without actually having found anything out yet. And you know, folks are available to help as soon as you're willing to ask them, and it will make your life much happier.
Great input, guys. And again, the people behind the technology, that's not just the technology itself that makes these things happen. So we got one other question. You guys did such a thorough job of covering all the bases that I think either the audience was a little bit scared to type in today, or you just covered a lot of things. So this is a question from Misha, and I'll read it verbatim here. It is, what is the best method for a client to use when executing a legal hold? How should they preserve data?
Well, that's going to depend a lot on your specifics, but as a general rule, whenever possible, I believe in preservation through collection. If you get it collected in a forensically sound manner and locked in an evidence cabinet somewhere, you're good. If you preserve it in place or you preserve it on a server inside the company, you're still on the hook for all of it. And any given day, employee forgets and deletes it or drops a Coke on the laptop or the hard drive that the stuff's on, and it's gone. So for my money, I would preserve through collection whenever possible, but it is a situationally specific analysis.
Yeah, certainly point in time collection would be the best way. And again, I say best, but it depends on your situation. But as long as you are in control and know what's happening with your systems, know where things are being deleted, and have control over your staff and how they actually function with their data and what controls they have, it can be done a multitude of ways. But you certainly just don't want to end up in, I had 10 gigs of PSTs yesterday and I have 0 today. That's a really hard argument to win.
And I'll mention to you one thing that often gets overlooked. Backup tapes and archival systems, mostly got talked about for years as big problems. There are much better tools for working with them now. So A, they're not that big a problem anymore, but B, they also can be a valuable resource early on in a project, like especially if it's an email or a network share heavy project. If you're not sure yet, how much you need to collect or what you need to do, for the cost of one set of your backup tapes, pull one set out of rotation and set it in an evidence locker, and then just go back to what you were doing. And then you have a restore point of all of those systems, the email and the main sources and things, for that whole period while you figure the rest of it out. And that's a pretty inexpensive way to lock up a bunch of your stuff while you narrow down the scope.
Yeah, we've done that before. You pretty much say this round of tapes is going to be the one we put away. We're going to wait till the next, backup point and then just go back to normal. And no one even knows the difference at that point. No one's bothered, no one's touched. And it can be really cost effective.
Absolutely.
I've got a follow-up question, kind of dovetailing off your answer that came in from Steve. I'll just read it verbatim here. It says, if you collect to preserve, what do you do when your situation dates are January 1st of 2015 through the present, which goes until unknown?
Well, I'm sure Bill and I have probably handled that a few different ways. I've worked cases where that's been the situation, and what's done is interval collections. In those cases, like some resources are sort of placed on hold, like automatic janitorial functions are suspended. For others, we agree on a protocol where, like, once a month, somebody goes through and does an update pull from each of the key mailboxes or custodians or whatever, or quarterly, or they'll agree on an interval and just keep going back through the pendency of the litigation. Because obviously, active businesses have to keep functioning. I mean, everybody can't just freeze for 2 years. So some type of agreement about just a periodic update collections is what I've seen done.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where you get a point in time and then you do intervals. You have to agree upon it, though. You can't have one party doing it every 3 months and one party doing it weekly. We've had situations where we've just, in essence, a case that's under a lit hold, we just, in essence, create a new location where nothing, unrelated to that matter can be stored there. You got to agree upon that too, because obviously there's human error involved and things like that. But As Matthew said, business must go on, so you can't just stop everything. And also, I think that it would be really tough for and I'm sure it happens, and I've dealt with it, as far as incremental updates of data, but it can't be ongoing forever. At some point, there has to be a stopping point of what you're gathering and what you're working with.
And guys,
Absolutely.
That's the last question I had, and just a quick shout out to Steve. This is his last name is actually Cornelius, so my apologies if I say anything about your cousin Yukon, but it was a great question, Steve. So thank you for sending in. That's all I've got from the question side, guys. Right. So again, nice job, Matthew. Feel free to wrap up.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bob. We certainly appreciate it, and thank you everyone for attending and staying over for the questions. We appreciate your time. Next month's program will be a follow-up to last month's social media program. We did an overview of all the legal issues and the collection issues and the rest of it last month, and there were quite a lot of follow-up questions specifically about the mechanics and what can be gotten in a more specific sense and how in a more specific sense. And so we're going to have Cindy McPherson, who is both one of our forensic analysts and who is also a certified cyber and social media investigator, lead a program that is more specifically on the mechanics and talk you through examples of materials you can go investigate yourself and how, as well as materials that you would need an expert to assist you in acquiring. And she's going to talk you through the practical and the pitfalls of doing some of those activities. So not one you'll want to miss. You can go register on our website. And if all of these topics sound silly to you, please go to our educational webinar topic survey and tell us what you would like to hear about instead. We are happy to cover whatever topics the community would like to hear. Thank you again. Have a great week, everyone.